Hello, everyone. Welcome to the last session of the day. And it's a very important session because it's about a strategic plan for the AIRR community. And so just to give you a bit of feedback or history of how this came about, and this is something that has been started in the communications committee by when Jamie was still on it. And I think Jamie and Felix wrote some kind of strategy of how we can build, a broader strategy of how we get broader acceptance of the AIRR standards and the AIRR way of thinking about our standards in the broader immunology community. And now we want to really push this forward and formalize this into a plan that we can actually execute. And this is called challenge session, and people were asking me whether you will be challenging me. And this will not be the case. I will be challenging you to come up with ideas of how we can actually implement or how we can come up with a strategic plan. And I think also Jamie will have something to say about this. So Jamie, if you have then something to say, just go to the microphone or you can come up here. Yeah. Okay, so I just put up some slides. They're very rough of what this idea is about, how we are thinking about this, how we want to formalize this, some ideas of what we mean by strategic plan, but everything is really rough. And at the end, I think, and so the slides will be quite quick, and then we can start discussing things. Yes, and this started, so the strategic plan is about sustainability of the AIRR community. And I think what you have seen today in the morning, all these working groups that have been working so hard over all these years to implement these standards, and now we see that slowly companies are implementing those standards. Many tools can now cooperate with one another because they know how to talk to one another because we have those standards. We have biological resources that are being now created to normalize batch effects across data sets, and all these kind of things are because we have this voluntary work by all of us, right? So this is of course great, but as you also see from the working groups, there is not enough supply from new members also coming, so fresh blood is missing. And we need to make this sustainable because technologies are changing, times are changing, and we need to constantly adapt our way of thinking, our standards. As you also see with the governance, right? It's changing over time and we need to constantly adapt. So we need some kind of sustainable way of ensuring that we can constantly adapt to the future and to broaden our impact on the community. I don't want to say world domination, but maybe something like that. Okay, so just to give a little bit of background again. So the mission of the AIRR community, and this is from the government's document, I think, is to advance and promote the generation, processing, analysis, and interpretation and application of high throughput sequencing data that characterize adaptive immune receptor repertoires, AIRR-seq data. And the vision of the AIRR community is to create a community of AIRR-seq data generators and users based on its core values of collaboration, inclusivity, transparency, and data and material sharing. And to achieve these goals, the AIRR-C develops work product in the form of research papers, talks, resources, including but not limited to methods for data generation, curation, analysis. And the problem is that our mission statement is kind of that we have this, we want a universal ontology of standards for characterizing AIRR data, and we have different working groups for that, but we need this to be easily shared among the community. And how do we actually communicate these standards to the community? And how can we tell other people that are using maybe AIRR-seq data, but don't know about us, how can we approach them even more directly?
Could I just add to that just slightly? And that is the fact that we want our standards accepted universally.
Exactly.
And the question is, how do you do that? Like we've been going to granting like NIH, and they'll put on a meeting for us, but they won't accept our standards and require it from people in their applications. And that's because they say, well, we don't have a mandate. We can't just do that. And you go to the journals and they do the same thing. So what is a way that we could actually get that kind of acceptance where we, it's just like the PDB. Now that's something you have to use, right? But our stuff don't have to use it. So how could that, even though we've reached out to other groups and all this other stuff, that's part of our mandate. But then how do we do that?
Yeah, exactly. So just what Jamie just said. So the problem is while of course we all have come a long way and many people know what the AIR community is, there are still many AIR-seq users that remain unaware or unwilling to adopt the standards, right? And I think this is really a big problem, especially for collaboration and using of public data, right? I mean, most of the data that is being created is, at least in the public domain, is created by taxpayer money. So it's actually, we are paying our money that, so we want then also to use it, right? But how can we use it if we don't even find it, if it's not deposited anywhere, deposited in a standard way? I mean, many of us know all our mini stories, right? That you find maybe data somewhere, then you have to pre-process everything, then you cannot replicate what those other groups have found, and so on and so forth. So we need some kind of a standard way. And even, I think, personally, even now when I write grants, for example, I still struggle with, should I use the word AIR or not? Because I'm not sure if the reviewers understand what I'm talking about. And if the reviewers don't know what I'm talking about, then I don't get the grant. And on the first page, the grant is killed, right? So we really need to be much broader. And I think we have a unique opportunity right now with the COVID pandemic has shown that our research is at the core of, solving this challenge, and we need to take advantage of that. Yeah. So, and what we, right, and then we know that from other fields, journals and even grant agencies prescribe standards to be used by the research that publish in these journals or get money from these granting agencies. But for AIRR-seq data, it's still the wild, wild west. You can do whatever you want, nobody cares. And that's not good for anyone. And I really think is that we need to, the key to this, or one of the keys to this, and this is, I think, where the discussion then can also start, is how do we ensure that we broaden our impact on more BCR and TCR-seq users? And one way, I think, is securing some kind of long-term funding. And that could, for example, be by either having even more larger scale collaborations from granting agencies, larger calls, or, for example, also from private foundations such as Chan Zuckerberg or something like that, or Melinda Gates Foundation, or also from finally also maybe industry coming in and really helping us, because this is, I think, the part of the community, many of you being also here, you many of the fruits that we have been, that we have been giving to the public domain, industry is using, but I think at some point it's also time to give back, that we all work together and not just in parallel. So yeah, the motivation is how can we as a community achieve greater dissemination, adoption, and sustainability of our AIRR-C standards, such as, for example, also sustained development of open databases, right? So, for example, let's think of the AIRR-receptor database. What happens with it after the AIRR-receptor grant is done? Who will maintain it? Who will go forward with it? I mean, and there are other databases, right? And then there are those then there's AIRR, then there are committees, you know, all these reviewing things that we need to do, creating things. Then we heard from the software group that they are creating tools. I mean, this is all on top of what these people are already doing in their PhD, postdoc, and PI work, right? So how can we make this more, how can we entice people to actually come on board with us? And yeah, that's why we need a strategic plan. So there's a lot to read. I will not go through everything, so don't panic. And there is already a large document where we have already brainstormed ideas, which we are happy to share with the broader community also. And here it's subdivided into phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3. We don't have to think about this too much. It's just what could be part of such a strategic plan. So what could be, just to give you ideas of what we would be thinking about. And these ideas that I'm detailing here mostly come from Felix, Jamie, and I also added. And I think Christian also added some of them, and other people from the exec committee. So we need to identify the standards that are ready for the universal use. We should identify who is using actually which type of data, so which parts of the communities actually use which tools, which data sets, which standards. What is the competition for us? So what are, who are the entities that don't use our standards but are still big, for example? And how can we talk to them and so that they also adopt our standards? And and I think the point D is something really important. What are we still missing in our portfolio? What does the broader community want? Why are they not coming on board? What is the missing link or the, you know, the activation potential that we cannot just reach? Why are they not coming on board? So we have already some things that why adopting AIR standards, you know, could be a plus. We have, of course, these data gateways, right? We have small recognition tokens of telling that you have done a good job, like this AIR compliant software badge that you can put on your GitHub. Of course, it enables collaboration. Once you adopt our standards, you can perform your analysis more easily. All these kind of things, you can read them. It helps with sustainability and so on. But maybe for some people, that is not enough to join our efforts. And what would be enough so that other people also come on board? And I think this is something that we should think about. And then we should look at who are the major players for each type of standards, and develop specific strategies for gaining acceptance of a specific standard by a given major player. And then, as Jamie already mentioned, I think, so we are in the AIR community part of TABS, the antibody society, but there are other societies above us, just like IUIS. How can we involve them? Also, how can we involve granting agencies? How can we involve journals to help us democratize our mission? And I think really that we need to come up with some kind of better funding. So I think we already starting now with giving these, what we have heard in this morning, right? We are now giving small grants to parts of our community that want to work on specific things that are still missing, which is really great. But wouldn't it be nice if we could make these grants much bigger and many more of them to actually, so that maybe people in the future could pay half of a PhD, for example, so that people really have a really dedicated portion of their work life on such a product, you know. So we need, I think, long-term funding to ensure the sustainability and continual adaptation of our standards, right? Because once we stop adapting, we can basically stop to exist. because there's always something new coming up. And this is, for example, one idea I put here again. So these are really just snapshots. And what I think the AIR community has not been targeting enough, I think, is the antibody development and discovery community, so the industry part. There are many, many companies now coming up, many startups coming up that have a lot of venture capital that are trying to use machine learning on, they're building language models. And for all these language models and for all their optimization analyses, they're using AIR data, most of the time public AIR data. So how can we approach those kind of groups, for example, to work with us to so that they use our standards and maybe also provide further funding or, at least talking points, bridges. And this is something that was also mentioned. So how do we come up with the strategic plan? So one building stone of that is that we would invite the working groups to contribute ideas to this strategic plan, because they have very specific ideas about how their work products can relate to the broader public. And with that, we just already mentioned also that it would be nice if from each working group we get, so you already told us today your 5-year plan, right? But what is the ultimate goal? What do you want to achieve at the very end? And I think these kind of goals should then be migrated in some form or another in the strategic plan. And so that we have this feedback also, that we don't only know what is your final goal, but also who is the audience that will appreciate that the most, so that we actually know who to talk to then, right? And yeah. Sure.
I kind of wrote that, so.
Exactly.
Yeah, no problem. So the idea was this, that because we're a grassroots community, we're bottom up, not top down. Yeah, we created a laundry list a couple of years ago, and we've added stuff to it, but that's a laundry list. What really matters in my mind anyway, and I think other people's minds, is that the working groups are really the workhorses of this community. And the working groups have very clear goals that they're going after that are short-term and long-term. And like basically, what would be the thing that if you could accomplish it in each one of the working groups that you would essentially dissolve because you're done? What would that be? And that would be a combination of two things: work products that are accepted, let's say standards or policies or whatever. And then the question is, who accepted them? Who's using them? So that is the audience. And once we get a clear idea of just those two concepts, so like this is like getting the kernel of what the working groups are doing and clarifying. We don't need a huge list of stuff. What we want is, what is the kernel of what you're after here? What do you visualize? Like, what would you go, we're finally done, we accomplished it. And this goes back to our definitions of what working groups are there for in the first place that Christian very nicely, has defined. So, so that is the thing, is that if we could get some kind of, I don't know, what I would call a working group together that would then be working with the executive to actually go around and discuss with all of the working groups. And until the working groups are happy with their kernels and their audiences and their work products, then we can go back and put the whole thing together and start looking at overarching, roles and things that, and try to then work through different processes. For instance, if a lot of working groups, and I think they want people to accept their standards, they want people to use their tools, they want, and the tools follow certain standards and so forth. And so to do that, how do we get it to those people? And one thing that we had talked about is doing it through the immunology societies by getting the societies on board, accepting those standards and saying, we love this, which I think that's possible to do. So I'm just putting that out there as kind of a general roadmap to getting a strategic plan and then working through the strategic plan according to what the working groups want in the first place. So I hope that helps.
Yeah, very nice. Exactly. So this is again summarizing what Jamie has just mentioned already. So the general way, very generally here forward, how we see it is that at this meeting we would put forward in this vote that will be going online tonight. So there will be several votes going online, but one of the votes will be whether we should form a subcommittee. So there's a mistake that's here, it's called a working group, but it should be subcommittee. We can also talk about whether it's subcommittee or working group, but it should not, let's not talk about this right now. Yeah, let's also table this discussion. Yeah. But what we want is so I'm now calling it Strategic Plan Subcommittee, so SPSC. And the vote that would only go on is that whether such a subcommittee should be formed. So that's the only thing that you would be voting on, that this would be formed. And then afterwards, what this subcommittee would be working on, how it would work, would be determined later. Yeah, but that would be the first major step, we think, towards actually bringing people together that want to work on this, that then go to the working groups, the subcommittees, ask them about their ultimate goals. We would synthesize them into a strategic plan. We would then put this out we would then submit this to the executive subcommittee for feedback, then also to the broader community for feedback. So there would be back and forth feedback to actually forming the strategic plan. Yeah, and the only thing that we would vote on in the next days is just whether such a committee should be actually formed. And I think that's a very good idea. Okay, let's go forward. And yeah, so this is also what just mentioned already. So part of this strategic plan would be that we talk to broader institutions, NIH, Horizon Europe, other institution focus, IUIS tabs, and so on and so forth. Let's go forward. And Jamie, do you want to say something about the big data initiatives here? So that's very briefly, maybe.
Let me just point out that we have been trying with with NIH and journals for the last 5 years. Yeah. And they've always said, you don't have a mandate. And that's why I actually think that going through the societies is something, maybe it won't work, but it's something we ought to try and we haven't done. And that's why IUIS, that's the International Union of Immunology or Immunological Societies. So that's the umbrella institution that all of the immunology societies are members of. And they're the guys that if they could become a little better at what they do, which we could help them do, then they could create policy that would go back, because their General Assembly are all representatives from every last one of the immunology societies in the world. And as a result, you've got a pathway to go back to the AAI or to the European Federation of Immunological Societies or whatever. So as a result, you can get those guys on board. You have a way to do it. And it just seems to me like that's the thing that we should really try to work on with the IUIS, because they are a little sclerotic compared to us. Our governance is awesome compared to those guys. Anyway, so one thing that we started, Felix and Bjorn Peters and Christian and I, we started a subcommittee of the Quality Assessment and Standardization Committee of the IUIS called, it's a horrible name. I'm sorry, but we couldn't, if you can come up with a better name, hand it in and we'll change it, I swear to God. Big Data for Immunology. And what that's supposed to do is essentially create a metadata standard that, that accommodates all kinds of omics data, essentially. And, you know, we made a big list of, I've been a horrible person because we haven't met since November, but I've been really caught up in TABS governance, IUIS governance, IGTR-MH committee insanity. And so that's just been a lot of governance writing for me. Anyway, we do have a mini strategic plan that we're going to be sending to the committee soon. But anyway, the idea is that we've started with 3 kinds of big data, and that being AIRR-seq data, RNA-seq data, and flow/mass cytometry data, where we would like to encourage, find the developers. Of course, we have the developers for AIRR-seq right here, standards. But, you know, for instance, Ryan Brinkman and a lot of people that came out of his lab developed Flow and FlowJo and all that stuff. So they've got developers for standards and they've been pushing for years. And so we'd like to get them on the committee and all this other stuff in the first instance so that they would all get together and create a beginning metadata standard that includes things like, you know, clinical data, disease ontologies on the one hand, and on the other hand, some of the stuff that is very specific to those 3 different data types. So it's kind of a one-size-fits-all that would fit everyone, who then could you know, you could be able to pull those data for systems immunology type work, which is part of the reason why we have that as our scientific challenge session. So that's kind of the idea.
Great, thank you. So you see that we have already parallel efforts towards a broader strategic plan kind of, but we want to kind of, you know, as a grassroots, we want to, that it comes from us basically, and then grows like a tree outward. A beautiful tree, of course. So let's go. Yes, so we are already at the end with the slides, of course. Afterwards, we can have discussion. If the vote goes through with this, with the founding of the strategic plan subcommittee, we will of course look for members that would like to join the subcommittee. Of course, these have to be AIR members, I guess, in good standing, as we just learned. And if you have any questions that you don't want to ask right now, you can get in touch. For example, here's my email, but you can also ask other people from the exec, I think, or Jamie. And and with that, I would like to open up for any questions. I think the slides were a bit all over the place, but you maybe get the idea of what we are trying to achieve. So broader, Felix,
I was just thinking, since a lot of this is about making sure people adopt our standards. I know with the iReceptor group and maybe with VDJ server, we'll run into papers and we'll think, well, maybe, you know, it's a lot of work to curate these papers. And we'll go, well, maybe we should be curating this paper as a priority. And then you'll look at the authors and it includes sometimes, you know, standard long-term members of the AIR community. So I think we need to look to ourselves some to make sure that we're working as hard as we can to put as much data as we can into the AIR community, which is be one part of the whole process.
Yeah. I agree that, some of us, I mean, including ourselves, also sometimes could be more in line with our own guidelines. I agree. Yeah. Mm.
So, Victor, you started with the shortage of hands to work on the working groups, and you know, I don't want to put a number on them, but there is a number of people, small number of people that are vital to the work of the working groups, and that number doesn't seem to grow. they're maxed out, and any loss of any one of those individuals would be a major blow to us.
Mhm.
And then we moved on to another topic, which I think is equally important, which is, you know, if you have a working group that's producing products, who are the customers for that product? How do you know what they want? How do they know that you have it?
Yeah.
You know, all of that kind of stuff,
Yeah.
which is obviously very important, but it's a different kind of thing.
Mhm.
And, you know, and what worries me, you know, if I'm one of those people on a working group and I'm maxed out doing what I'm doing, how is this going to help me? Is this another thing that I have to do? Or, you know, what do we do about that problem of people getting maxed out and new blood not coming in and, you know, eventually people burning out? What do we do about that?
Yeah, I think that's exactly what we have to think about, how we do this. Yeah, I don't have good ideas. Yeah, but I think one idea for that is long-term funding, right? I mean, for example, we saw by the this precision FDA initiative that was mentioned several times, right? There, several members of us were expected to provide work for free, you know, for major work packages, you know, and this cannot be, of course. There needs to be longer term funding for, yeah, but how to get that funding?
Well, I mean, that to me is a slightly different question to, I mean, you've got the working groups pitching their products and how to get them accepted.
Yeah.
But I think one of the issues with, you know, we talk about funding a lot, but what form would that take? And how do we turn that into an attractive proposition for industry? You know, we go along, we ask for money, but for what? You know, I think that's one of the things we're blocked on.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I think is kind of important, and again, this is a long way off, but IUIS has all these affiliates. They've got all these societies, you know, tabs, all these societies that are affiliate members, and they vote. They're part of the General Assembly and they vote and everything. But what they don't have, and I think they would be very happy to start thinking about having, is they don't have any industrial affiliates. And again, if you can get at the level of this international body, it looks very sexy, even though they're sclerotic as hell. And they have the same problem with their committees that, you know, they haven't turned over their people in 100 years, which is one of the problems with IMGT and all that stuff. Anyway, so the point I'm trying to make is that IUIS, and I'm hoping to kind of help them with that because I've been doing governance work for them, and that is that they will create a kind of affiliate that is industrial affiliate, and that they will pay dues just like everybody else does. So if a company has 100, I don't know, people, then they would pay $9 a head, or maybe more because they're industrial, to be members. But then you could actually get them on the committees and participating, and that would revive some things, right? I mean, that's the thing, is we don't have much industry on our committees. And yet we're close with a lot of companies and stuff. I mean, we got, Felix and others got what, $100,000 committed to this meeting. That's amazing. Anyway, so at the level of IUIS, I can see that happening. And then the companies, if they want to, can form their own little coalitions. But you could have, for instance, if we could get buy-in that's international to, let's say, the germline databases all being part of, you know, a set that anybody can get into, but you need a gateway. You have to make the gateway so that people can then, you know, use them, get into them seamlessly, kind of like what they've done for iReceptor or for the AIR data commons. Then I guess what I'm thinking is then maybe industry would pay for that. Like, why should they be paying IMGT $25,000 a pop?
Exactly.
When they could have access to this gateway? And I'm telling you, I think a lot of people would jump at the chance, but we need to become part of the international body. And let me point out that, for instance, AIRR would like to see AIRR joining one of the subcommittees, the IGTRMH once we get it so that we actually trust the damn committee. But the point is that when AIRR comes in, they don't have to break their association with their community, because we got all kinds of committees that are actually just the mouthpiece. And of course, AIRR wouldn't be, but just the mouthpiece for, you know, like the complement society, or the, you know, I don't know, the society that's in charge of CD molecules or whatever. So my point is that we don't have to change anything, because we're already operating on the level of democracy, inclusivity, you know, and a diversity, and insofar as we can. So this is not going to be hard it's not asking us to change. We're just saying, you guys need to recognize us. Let's get that to happen. And I think that could actually create a lot of opportunity, not only for us, but for them.
So I have two comments, one a potential solution, and one a probably unhelpful problem comment. The first one is the strategy that we've taken with getting people to adopt the rearrangement standard is to focus on sort of the major players first, you know, and then we have seen after you get into IG Blast and IMGT and some other and a Cell Ranger, other tools start adopting it, right? And that is seemed to have worked pretty well so far, but we have hit roadblocks that we can't get past, namely adaptive and Mixer, because it doesn't seem to be maintained anymore. They were totally on board adopting the standard, but they haven't touched the software in 2 years. So that's one problem I don't know how to solve. Another issue, but that's like a ground up, right? That's not going to the organizations. It's starting with the actual community, people in this room, getting them to do it, and then creating some momentum. The other thing I was going to say, I've totally forgotten. That was the good one. That was the good one.
Yeah. It sounded like the bad one.
I forgot the bad one. I live in a beautiful world. It's amazing. I'll sit, let someone else talk.
Yeah.
Hi. Oh, that's a lot, sorry. Hi, because I can't comment on anything else but I can comment on New Blood. You said about getting New Blood in and involving students, and I was just wondering if you ever considered perhaps setting up trainees and training systems and training, I guess, worker groups, bands or committees, whatever they're called, within universities, because I can guarantee you that there are very much, many eager students getting graduated that will work, honestly, for almost free. And they will do good work if you trust them and if you train them well. They will learn quickly as well because they're in that line. And on top of that, you speak about funding as well. A lot of universities have family offices backing them up, and you could reach out to them as well. And that way you can get new blood who is eager and will have new ideas as well, and perhaps shift and diversify, and perhaps bring in some money. For example, just to give one, you have Cambridge Institute, which is mainly backed by family offices. That was all. It was just a suggestion. Bye.
Yeah, just to that. So yeah, for the working groups, I think we put out a call that we want so we want trainees also more in those working groups to kind of yeah, have a supply from bottom up basically. So yeah, but yeah, and mentoring also, what we just had also, for example, outside. Yeah, yeah.
So thank you for reminding me of bad news. So funding, I think, is a great idea. One problem I foresee is that, at least in the case of standards, I can see a clear endpoint, and I'm sure everybody else in the team will completely disagree with me on what that endpoint is. But I can see an endpoint, but then once we get to it, the work that has to be done is not published. It is not interesting. It is totally boring, software maintenance, minor update kind of work. And that would need to be funded. Someone would have to do that work, but I don't know how you could get a grant or get a PhD student to do it. And yeah, you could try.
Jamie, you need to use the
Yeah, here, go for it.
Well, so that's the whole IUIS thing, is that I think if they became, now they have their own problems. So, you know, don't get me, it's not like they're a perfect institution, but potentially if they could bring in industry, I think that the things that industry would like to have, like around, you know, repertoire analyses and all that kind of stuff, and being able to do the stuff they want to do, and not having to reinvent the frickin' wheel to do it. And then they can keep their, you know, certain things private to themselves and so forth, like they need to. But they would be helping to make it the way they want it, and then they can, you know, if there's something that needs to be funded, it's going to be very discreet, and that can be funded. Like what you're talking about is sort of like a tools review committee. You've already got your tools. They're going to use them, and those are going to go on, and they need to be maintained and versioned and, you know, upgraded and all that to whatever's happening. But it's kind of like a review committee, right? And so that needs to then just be there in the future, and it needs funding. So that's the kind of thing I'm thinking, is that in this larger body, maybe that would be the best way to go, because we're pretty small. And that it helps us in some ways, but it makes us feel like we're not really, quote, a mandate for doing things sometimes. So that's, I don't know, that's kind of the way. And again, that's just one way of doing it.
So if that committee had an engineer they hired to actually do the work, I don't know if that would be part of it though. And another thing is you could start going after, we could start going after the startups that are making software that is intended to be sold to antibody engineering and, you know, immuno-oncology, whatever the latest thing is, to see if they can get them to adopt standards, because then you might be able to kind of grassroots it up if all of the toolkits that are being developed and sold to pharma are complying with the standards. But that's difficult too, because if they've already invested a bunch of development time and they have customers, they're not going to want to change it. You know, the customers aren't going to want them to change it. Also not a solution.
Well, what about
interoperability is important, but if you have like bought a solution, right, and you're a pharmaceutical company, you don't care about interoperating with other pharmaceutical companies.
But you do if you have access to everybody else's data and to be able to work with it seamlessly.
That's true, but at least in my experience, that's not how anybody engineering departments always work.
We have a suggestion from Ulrich on the Zoom. Ulrich, do you want to unmute yourself now? Perhaps I'll summarize it for him. He was asking whether we should be attending more conferences and having a booth promoting the working group in the wider community.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. That's why I think we have created this poster also. So what was mentioned this morning also, that the communication subcommittee has created this AIRR community poster, and I think anybody of the AIRR community is we are happy to share it with you, and that you can use it to all the conferences that you're going. So I think that's a great idea. Yeah, I agree.
So hi, I'm Diana, and historically I haven't worked in immune repertoire, but I have worked on standards with the FDA and other governing areas. And I'm going to bring up an area around funding. Whenever it's funded by industry, there's always assumption of bias, and that's something that the FDA doesn't really like. And so you're going to have to offset that. What we did in my previous experience was get a coalition of multiple companies, so that in industry and academia to support that, and then did similarly socialized it within conferences. So I'd advise for you guys to consider that as well.
And just a question, for this coalition to be formed, how was this then funded? So where did the money come from?
That was from various sponsorships. It wasn't a very high lift coalition. It was very grassroots, and then everyone got funding through their own means.
I see.
It's kind of late now, but it's Monday, but Wednesday, of course, we have our industry network reception. And so if there are any somebody mentioned startups. I mean, if there's any local contacts that might still be interested in attending they actually can sign up just for the network, which goes from 5:15 to 7, I think, on one.
Exactly, and especially the table 1, I think, could be
we have
relevant.
it's
about open data. Yeah. Yeah, Vijay, please.
Hi, I'm Vijay from Omniscope, and I'd like to commend you. This is my first AIR meeting, and I've never seen a group which is so animated and has such constructive discussions, including for strategic planning. I'm from industry. So, industry is driven fundamentally by clinical utility. And when I look at the Frontiers paper, which is fantastic, and I duly shared it, the immunome as a diagnostic will require, of course, that clinical utility, that endorsement, that the standards that we as a community are seeking to deliver are standardized across the board and across diseases. So we have a lot to do with the power of the immune system itself. And I think one of the elements which Dr. Greif has touched on is this idea of a badge. A lot of us who are trying to advance the sector and deliver these underlying technologies to patients will need that endorsement, will need also to standardize our data sets with yours. I think it's a no-brainer to work collaboratively with academia because it is you who drive innovation. I guess my point would be really working with those of us in the industry who already have dialogues with the EMA, with the FDA. We're already doing this. And this is what most of us has done in all our careers. Doing that together with you and that badge and driving this from a clinical utility perspective actually then pulls funding. Because the ultimate outcome for industry is we need to deliver a profit. But we're not going to be able to deliver a profit without the clinical utility and the standardization. So I think the idea of a badge and working with all of us here would really drive this and create a monetary incentive to actually use the AIR standard. And I think we have a unique opportunity because there is no other standard. So you guys are driving it. Yours are better.
Yes, please, Oscar. I think that was great input. Yeah.
Sorry, this might be a naive question, but has there been like a review process of how other standards have been standardized? Like, for example, a FASTA format or a VCF format? I know the FASTA format came about because there was a program that was really good, and so a lot of people used it and it just became legacy. The VCF format came out, I think, because of the huge 1,000 genomes project that a lot of people ended up using.
Personally, I haven't, but I think that's a good idea. And I think what is also a good idea is to look at other communities, right? Because we are the AIR community. There's also, for example, a human cell atlas, of which we have also some of the people sitting in the audience. And this community, I think, has been doing a bit better than we. So it seems to be that they can attract more funding than we can do. So I think we can learn from other communities also, and how we can attract attention. And it shouldn't be so difficult for us because the immune system is so important for everything. So, somehow BCRs and TCRs seem to be difficult to grasp.
So the answer to that question is yes. So many years ago now, it seems, when data representations was first developing the standard, we actually had the developer of SAM tools, SAM in the BAM format, come and talk to us. We reviewed BCF, we reviewed a bunch of other sort of similar standards that were adopted. We took a lot of from the IMGT, I keep getting out of the mic. We took a lot from the IMG ontology work. We also screened all of the custom file formats that people were using for their individual in-house tools and tried to create a consensus. We have a bit of a rule where in order for something to be adopted, it has to be appear multiple times in multiple different tools in order to become officially part of the standard. Where there were conflicts, we went to the tool developers and tried to get consensus for the standard. So that's the background on that.
So much discussion.
Hi. So a few questions because several things have been addressed. So and probably the better way to deal with them is to separate them into smaller problems. So first, the representability problem. I really don't know how this is addressed, but just go to the IUIS and ask what we need to have mandate and do that. I mean, it does not have to change exactly the way you work. I mean, if the answer is you will never have because we are in charge, then I'm sorry, but it is a rhetorical.
Like that.
Okay, good. But the thing is, I mean, this is a dialogue process, and this is dealt with it. I mean, you are experts in this domain, so I mean, what do you need to have the representative? That's a separate question, and I would not mix it with the rest. Then the early career researchers. I think this is a really good idea. Probably, I mean, I don't know how much money you are able to mobilize as a community. I mean, you made this meeting, but I mean, overall, it's not millions that you are managing directly. So maybe you have a bit of money and you can stimulate the early career researchers to join, and from that, some things can happen and spin out. Then products. I mean, when you go into products and call them by that name, you have a responsibility. I mean, this is the role of the companies, of the industry. So, and there is, I mean, it was already said. I mean, it's about the acknowledgement and the money. Of course, they need to regenerate profit. So I don't think it should be the goal to kind of generate these products, but maybe stimulate the ones that you think that are good, endorse them, rather than assume the responsibility of maintaining them forever, because that costs money, that costs software engineering getting work and working and getting paid. So some things can be maintained and exist because they are open source and because, I mean, a number of reasons, but I mean, but to assume that there will be a product and it's there and it will be maintained, I don't know how to do this. So just a few ideas. Some of them I think they are good and in the right direction. Some, I mean, need to be thought over.
I agree. That's why we just vote on founding this committee, and then we really will refine what we want to work on. But very good input.
Hello, I have some ideas that I've been writing down. So has the community reached out specifically, not just for the sequencing companies, but for the companies that build the primers for TCR and BCR sequencing? Because I don't think anybody's using custom primers anymore, right? Everyone's using from a company. So as the community reached out to those companies and telling, we have this standard, you probably have your standard as well, and present the numbers. So you know that the community has this size, and you say, this is these 1,000 users that we guarantee you use these standards. So if your product follows these standards, you will probably gain a bigger audience. Then the other thing is legitimizing the AIRR community. So it's not on a registry like Ring Gold. When you see all the entities that you exist, the AIRR-C community doesn't exist. So I think if it would be possible to officialize better the AIRR community as well, looking at this also as a bioinformatics problem. So we've talked about reaching out to the immunology societies, but how about the computational biology society? They have their also committees of special interest. Why was the decision to belong to the antibody society and not to the International Society of Computer Biology? That maybe that one made more sense. Also regarding the standards, there's a big coalition that defines standards now, like CRAM, so the Global Alliance for Genomics and Health, that has big players like the Broad Institute, the OICR, they define now a lot of standards for human health. So why doesn't the AIR community reach out to that coalition that already exists, that's very big, that has research and also business, and because that coalition only does that, adapts defined standards for large adoption, and maybe they don't even know that the AIR standard exists. So those are my comments.
Yep, I agree. So, but probably the biological resources group has been maybe in touch with primer companies, or feel free to comment and correct me. And I agree that from the bioinformatics side, but usually I think bioinformatic people that work on our data immediately know the AIR community, whereas it's more the immunology groups that create large-scale data sets that don't, those are the ones that don't know about the AIR community, usually. But I agree, for example, that I find it a bit odd sometimes that at the large computational biology conferences, only very small sessions, if at all, are on immune receptor analysis, which I think should change because, of course, our data is the most complex and the most difficult to work with. Of course, they're single cell, but AIR data is much more interesting.
Yeah, I mean,
I'm kidding, of course.
I mean, we have to do that more. I mean, we have reached out to the Global Alliance for Genomics and Health, and we've beaten down the door for adaptive, you know, trying to see if we could get them to at least, you know, have a common metadata standard. So trying that, but it takes a lot of time, and we need to do it more.
Hi, I'd just like to dispel the rumor that startup companies and mid-level companies are coming up with their own tools. We were so glommed onto open source tools, and I feel like those open source tools become AIR dataset, you'll watch that trickle all the way up the ladder. So I just wanted to make that comment.
That's great to hear.
No, I'm now back in academia.
So this is a little bit off topic, but it's not hugely off the topic. So I was talking to Brian Briney today, and he had told me, and so I'm going to ask you to tell people about your experience in your grants, where you're mentioning your use of, data standards and, so forth, and that has actually resulted in very positive feedback from your grant reviewers. And I'm wondering if that's the case, maybe we should get a few people together to help with kind of, he'll tell you.
Well, I think it's two things. So one is I'm on the software working group. So even if reviewers don't know what that means, I think it sounds kind of important and you're like contributing back to the community. So usually that's appreciated. And the other is particularly when you're talking about like rigor of research or things like that, or your kind of your data plans, being able to reference like a field standard, I think is very useful for reviewers, particularly if reviewers aren't familiar with the field very intimately, and you can point to a generalized standard that everyone's using and that you're conforming to those standards. I think that's appreciated as well. It also makes the writing easier because you don't have to detail everything you're doing. You just say, we are doing it in accordance with these field standards, right? So I think for me, that's probably one of the bigger benefits we've gotten from this, is that it just makes the writing process much, much easier. Yeah, usually most of the applications that I've put in, that's mentioned as strengths, either the contribution back to like working groups and field standards, but also the fact that we're using them. So if we have tools that are given like the stamp of approval by the software working group, that's also, even if the reviewers don't really know what that means, you're getting some sort of outside verification that it is a legitimate tool and that it's kind of conforming to what the people in the field are using. So I think the more that we do that, A, it's hopefully good for your grant applications, but B, all of those reviewers are now seeing that AIRR whatever is the standard in the field and that that's what everyone should be using.
So just to say that that seems to be a common thread across both industry and academia then. Both of them are saying if they can demonstrate they're using an accepted standard, then that helps them draw in money.
Yeah, and that's, I think, the point that we need to get across more. Yeah, yeah. Okay, I think we're coming maybe to what's the time then? Oh, perfect. So are there any further ideas? I think we got a lot of ideas. Everything has been recorded, of course, so we can play it back and listen to everyone again and again and again, which we will, of course. And if you have any other questions, just get back to us. We will, so you will see in the voting thing that will be sent out that we will be founding this subcommittee. So that will be very exciting. And then in the medium term, you will see some kind of, you will approach the working groups. You will see a working document to which everybody can contribute over time so that we can all build a stronger strategy for the future. And hopefully in a few years, all these questions that we have raised now, we can actually answer in a very robust way. With that, I think we can close this session, and then at 6, there will be a voting email, right, Pam? Yeah, maybe Pam comes. Yes, yes.
Hi. Okay, so a couple things are going to happen still. I was out of the room. So did you mention that we have our opening keynote at 7?
No, that I left to you.
Okay.
Yeah.
So our opening keynote's at 7 with Dennis Burton. It'll be in here. And then there'll be a welcome reception outside. If you've been out in the foyer, you can see all those beautiful tablecloths billowing in the wind. So that'll be fun. We're going to have an outside reception. But yes, the voting for the working group and subcommittee plans and for the executive election will be sent out. We're just building it out right now. We're almost done. I think we're missing one report actually, but we're almost done. And then that'll go out through MailChimp to the whole AIRR community membership. And we're modifying what we were going to do with the governance that was going to be in the vote, but now we're going to change that. So that'll be a separate email that goes out. So it'll just go out, working groups, subcommittee plans, election, and the vote on to form the strategic plan committee. Okay.
Great, then we can have a break until 7, I guess, right?
Yeah, try to come back here for quarter 2
Yeah.
so we start on time.
Great. Okay.
That'd be great.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.